The sun was a dazzling white ball, shining brightly through the window, making Chloe's tiny sitting room as hot as a roasting dish. As Chloe leaned closer to Bethany Bridges, she could feel a bead of sweat beneath her cotton dress, making its careless way down her backbone like a little beetle. She inserted a pin into a fold of heavy white silk, yanked the fabric hard against Bethany's skin, and felt the girl take a panicky inward gasp. It was too hot to work, thought Chloe, standing back and pushing tendrils of wispy fair hair off her forehead. Certainly too hot to be standing in this airless room, corseting an anxious, overweight girl into a wedding dress which was almost certainly 2 sizes too small. She glanced for the 100th time at her watch and felt a little leap of excitement. It was almost time. In only a few minutes the taxi would arrive and this torture would be over, and the holiday would officially begin. She felt faint with longing, with a desperate need for escape. It was only for a week, but a week would be enough. A week had to be enough, didn't it? Away, she thought, closing her eyes briefly. Away from it all. She wanted it so much it almost scared her. Right, she said, opening her eyes and blinking. For a moment she could barely remember what she was doing, could feel nothing but heat and fatigue. She had been up until 2 the night before, hemming 3 tiny bridesmaids' dresses, a hasty last-minute order. The hideous pink-patterned silk, chosen by the bride, still seemed to be dancing in front of her eyes. Her fingers were still sore from clumsy needle pricks. Right, she said again, trying to muster some professionalism. Her gaze gradually focused on Bethany's damp flesh spilling over the top of the wedding dress like an over-risen cake mixture, and she pulled an inward face. She turned to Bethany's mother, who sat on the small sofa, watching with pursed lips. That's about as good a fit as I can get, but it's still very much on the tight side. How do you feel, Bethany? Both women turned to survey Bethany, whose face was slowly turning puce. I can't breathe, she gulped. My ribs. She'll be fine, said Mrs. Bridges, eyes narrowing slightly. You just need to go on a diet, Bethany. I feel sick, whispered Bethany. Honestly, I can't breathe. She gazed with silent desperation at Chloe, who smiled diplomatically at Mrs. Bridges. I know this dress is very special to you and your family, but if it's really too small for Bethany, it's not too small, snapped Mrs. Bridges. She's too big. When I wore that dress, I was 5 years older than she is now, and it swung around my hips, I can tell you. Involuntarily, Chloe found her eyes swivelling to Bethany's hips, which pressed unhappily against the seams of the dress like a large mass of blancmange. Well, it doesn't swing round mine, said Bethany flatly. It looks awful, doesn't it? No, said Chloe at once. Of course it doesn't. It's a lovely dress. You just... She cleared her throat. You just look a bit uncomfortable around the sleeves, and perhaps around the waistline. She was interrupted by a sound at the door. Mum! Sam's face appeared. Mum, the taxi's here, and I'm baking. He wiped the sweat elaborately from his brow with his T-shirt, exposing a tanned, skinny midriff. Already? Said Chloe, looking at her watch. Well, tell Dad, would you? Okay, said Sam. His eyes shifted to Bethany's miserable, trussed-up form, and an ominous mirth began to spread over his 16-year-old face. Yes, thank you, Sam, said Chloe quickly before he could say anything. Just go and tell Dad the taxi's here, would you? And see what Nat's doing. The door closed behind him, and she breathed out. Right, she said lightly. Well, I've got to go, so perhaps we could leave it there for today, if you do want to go ahead with this particular dress. She'll get into it, cut in Mrs. Bridges with quiet menace. She'll just have to make an effort. You can't have it both ways, you know. Suddenly she turned on Bethany. You can't have chocolate fudge cake every night and be a size 12. Some people do, said Bethany miserably. Kirsten Davis eats what she likes and she's size 8. Then she's lucky, retorted Mrs. Bridges. Most of us aren't so lucky. We have to choose. We have to exercise self-control. We have to make sacrifices in life. Isn't that right, Chloe? Well, said Chloe, I suppose so. Anyway, as I explained earlier, I am actually going on holiday today, and the taxi's just arrived to take us to Gatwick, so perhaps if we could arrange— You don't want to look like a great fat pig on your wedding day, exclaimed Mrs. Bridges. To Chloe's horror, she got up and began to tweak her daughter's trembling flesh. Look at all this. Where did this all come from?